Okay, so hi everybody. This is kind of going to be a bonus to the summit. Um, I know after our talk on Monday with Mike, a question came to mind I meant to ask during it, and I totally spaced because we were really focusing on our emotions and how they affect one another in our vibrational frequency and things like that. But the question that comes to mind for me is, does our emotions affect our physical body, and can it make us sick? And the reason I ask this question is a couple reasons. So in my past relationship, we dealt with depression, and oftentimes depression comes with upset stomach. It comes with pains, aches and pains in the body, and that alone can cause a different emotion that causes even more anxieties and things like that. And I often found, or I often thought to myself, if you just had a better attitude, then maybe you would feel better. But I couldn't get that through to him. And until I started to really dive into learning about depression, anxiety, and different things, I didn't quite believe it myself. But then when somebody very, very close to me ended up getting cancer, it was another big highlight to me that, okay, I know this woman's past. I know there's stuff that she has not dealt with, and it has gone on for 10 years that I knew of for certain. And I even questioned her at the time, like, do you think that some of the stuff that you won't let go or that you won't forgive, or, do you think that may have caused it? And I actually believe still to this day that the reason why she got sick was to bring to light for her body was telling her that it's time to take care of you and not everybody else. So I wanted Mike to give us a good explanation as to his perception on this, and maybe help us think about our physical body when we're feeling pain or dis-ease of some sort. Could it be attached to some sort of suppressed emotion?
Well, 100%. Uh, if For those of you who didn't tune in and see the interview on Monday, I have been practicing energy work for about 20 years professionally, but really it's been my whole life. And a lot of my training stems fairly deep into Chinese medicine and Chinese medicine theory. And throughout Chinese medicine history, they haven't just looked at the body as a physical structure like we do in Western medicine. Western medicine very much views the body like a machine. And if a part breaks down, we'll take that part out, put a new part in. And if those two parts can work together, then we've corrected the problem. Well, that's great in certain cases where we do need those organ transplants. But what if we could get ourselves into a place of happiness and health without getting to the point of needing those organ replacements? And one of the big things is our emotional state and our ability to actually process those emotions. So in Chinese medicine, they've built a whole system around this idea that the various organs in our body are actually responsible for producing, regulating, and controlling the various emotions in our body. So I'll just quickly go through those. So the heart and the small intestines and what is known as the triple heater and the pericardium, those are responsible for regulating joy and sadness in our life. And joy and sadness are actually the exact same emotion. I want you to look at joy and sadness as the opposite sides of the same coin. And joy and sadness is really meant to keep us present to the moment. Then if we look at the stomach and the spleen, their role in our life is to generate worry. And I don't want you to see any of these emotions as a bad or a negative thing. And I really don't like the word negative and positive, because they have real specific connotations to them, and they don't accurately describe what it is we're going through. So I personally prefer the explanation or the description of a lower vibration and a higher vibration, because we can have worry in a low vibration or worry in a higher vibration. So when we're expressing worry in an unhealthy way, that leads to confusion. that's when we start to enter that worry spiral and keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, and are really unable to find the answer we're looking for. But when we use that worry in a very positive, or sorry, a very a more higher vibrational state, that allows us to think, to allow us to actually solve our problems. And what's really amazing about worry for most people is they usually find the answer and the solution to their problem right away, but then they start to question, oh, is that the right choice? What if, what if, what if, what if? And all that questioning is what actually leads them to confusion. And very rarely they'll actually find a solution. Then we look at the lungs and the large intestines. Well, those are the emotions that are involved with grief in the body. And grief is there to help us disperse energy and attachment to things that are no longer in our life. Grief isn't just about the loss of somebody and the death of somebody. Grief could be moving away from where you grew up and having a hard time adjusting to where you're living now. Maybe it's oh, my first car was my favorite car. It did everything I wanted, and ever since I changed that car, I just haven't been happy, right? So we have to look at grief beyond just the idea of death, because it is really the energy and the emotion we use to break free of attachment from things that no longer serve us or no longer in our life. And with grief, if we don't express that grief in a healthy way, it actually leads to what is referred to as like a disintegration. It's almost like the rug gets pulled out from under your feet and you don't know which way is up, and your life begins to fall apart. You know, it's not uncommon for the spouse of somebody who's passed away to pass away themselves within a few months or a few weeks after their loved one has passed on, because they've really just haven't allowed that grief to process in a healthy way, and they just give up, and their body basically goes into that disintegration mode and starts to fall apart. Next, we'll look at fear. Well, that's the role of the kidneys and the bladder, is to generate fear in our body. And again, this isn't like the fear of saying something wrong. This is more about the fear about staying alive, doing those things. It's the fear that causes you to look both ways before crossing the street. Because if you just step out into the street and you're not looking, who's to say there's not going to be a truck or a bus there that boom, hit you right away, right? So again, it's that willpower to stay alive, and that fear to stay alive that is generated by the kidneys and the bladder. And what's really interesting about that is, in Chinese medicine, the kidneys actually have a huge influence over our physical needs. And well, what are the couple things that happen when you're absolutely terrified? Your legs either get weak, or they give out and you collapse to the ground, or you wet yourself, right? It's very common for people to pee themselves with fear and terror. Well, that's really a sign that the kidney and or the bladder have just been so overwhelmed by the fear that they let go, and we wet ourselves, or we become paralyzed, or we collapse. And that's a very common experience for people who are really terrified. And the last group is the liver and the gallbladder, and their role in our body is to generate anger. And again, I want you to see anger as a more of a positive emotion than, or more of a higher vibrational state than the lower vibrational state that most people associate with it. So anger is really designed as the emotion to create movement in our life and lead us towards change. So if we think about this, if I'm trying to walk down a hallway and there's someone who's just like arms spread, blocking the way in the hallway, and they refuse to move, my option is to either just turn around and walk away, or if I really want to get past it, well, I'm going to have to express some anger. And I'm using that anger to really channel that energy through me and to create a movement, really to move that person out of my way so I can continue on my way. And what's really interesting here about anger is when we experience anger, we should experience it for no longer than 90 seconds. That's about enough time for us to experience the emotion, bring it forward, express it, and release it. So if we hold on to anger after 90 seconds, that's actually us choosing to create a grudge and to hold on to that vibration. And I'll kind of give a little bit of an example that's very similar to the one that you gave there, Robin. It was actually my uncle. My uncle passed away about 10 years ago from liver cancer. And when he got the diagnosis of liver cancer, everyone in my family was so surprised and blown away, like, how could this happen? And then I just kind of went, you know what? That makes absolute perfect sense to me because I had the training and the knowledge. And when I looked back at my uncle's life since I was born, with his ex-wife and his children, all they did was fight. Their way of communication was yelling and screaming at each other. They very rarely, if ever, actually had a conversation about anything. So that was a house that was just always full of anger and rage and yelling and screaming. So when I started to look at this, that's so just from when I was alive, at that point, that was 32 years of anger that had built up and actually has started to overwhelm his liver and actually manifested itself as a stage 4 cancer, which eventually took his life. And to me, it made perfect sense. But to someone who didn't have that education, they were really just blown away as to how he developed liver cancer when there was no history of it in our family.
Couple examples come up in my head, just kind of going back to a higher frequency of one of those emotions versus a lower frequency. So in the example of the anger and the hallway, so it's a higher vibration on being that you take that anger, you express it, and you try to move forward with that person. And then the lower vibration would be walking away. And
the lower vibration is more about an explosion. So that's
okay.
the person that I know I didn't explain that in my explanation there, but that's the person who bottles up all that anger and bottles it up and bottles it up and bottles it up. And then it just takes somebody accidentally knocking over something on the table that boom, that person explodes, and all that pent up anger and rage is really released on somebody in a situation that really didn't deserve it.
Okay.
So that's more of the lower vibrational expression is really the non-expression of anger that leads to an explosive release.
Okay, so the way I'm kind of understanding it is like a higher vibration of understanding our emotions is to be a little bit more accepting of them, working through them versus penting them up until the cap blows off.
Correct. And that's all of our emotions, right? They all have that higher vibrational expression and a lower vibrational expression. And you know what? It's not a bad thing to express our emotions in those lower vibrations. But it's very important that if and when we do, we actually take that moment, take a half an hour or an hour afterwards and actually sit down and think like, okay, why did I react that way? What is it that's happened in my life that's created me to have that unhealthy reaction to this situation? What is it I'm actually afraid of? And what is it that I'm failing to recognize about myself that leads me to those patterns and behaviors and reactions?
Awesome. So last night, JC was on and she really dove into our nervous system and how the fight and flight response works actually, and how we can go up to this peak, and this peak is generalized as a depression. And in order to get out of it, we kind of have to go back through the emotions of that fight or flight response again. So could you give us a few examples of maybe that in real life?
Well, it's I always tell all my clients as I'm working with them is like, they may have a deep emotional release while I am working. Their body may go into that state of pain or injury if that's what we're working through. And it's because our body does have that cellular memory. And the only way to actually release the charge of that stored cellular memory in our body is to actually look at it, to shine a light on it, to say, hey, look, I see you. And actually begin that process of talking with that emotion, talking with that feeling, talking with that state, to begin to understand where it came from, why you keep expressing it in that way, and to help you figure out what is a healthier, more appropriate expression or way to deal with these situations. And it really starts with communication and learning a healthy communication. So
That's awesome. She really did give an explanation about like listening to the voices and giving them space and ask them questions. And for somebody who, you know, even for myself, I'm really open-minded about those things. But until she explained the whole process of trauma, and that trauma is really just when your nervous system has gone to a point where it can't take anymore.
yeah.
Then it was like, okay, talking to the voices makes a whole lot more sense.
Yes.
So all week we've talked about how we need to, allow ourselves to feel the feelings. And like when it comes to our physical body, we need to listen to it. And if it's whispering, then, like if you need to stretch, get up and stretch. Don't just let it boil into a blown out back where you need to lay down for 3 days, because that's only going to make it worse. So I love that, the week has blown into this conversation right here, because I feel like this is going to give everybody a real eye opener to what holistic really means. So when we're trying to treat our body holistically, there may be different forms of holistic treatment that you do that resonates with you, but it really does mean that we have to start looking at the root cause of our emotions, of our pain, whatever it is. And we need to listen to our body instead of just coding it with some sort of a prescription or whatever. Maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's, we all have our form of coping. Instead of, doctoring ourselves up with stuff like that, we need to start peeling off the layers and really start to understand literally ourselves. So for me, like, yes, eating right is a form of self-care. Yes, exercising, form of self-care. All of the tips that have been shared this week are important forms of self-care. But the big picture is you need to start that self-knowledge that will move into more self-love.
Correct. And you have to be not afraid of what you will uncover. And that's what really stopped a lot of people from starting that process is they're actually scared of what it is they will uncover about themselves. And a lot of that process, as you go through it, you will face a lot of the shame and the guilt and all that repressed stuff that you've kept hidden because, hey, if people know this about me, they won't like me. And what's amazing is when you do find the courage to actually start going through that process is, yes, you may see some people in your life disappear out of your life, but that's a sign that they weren't actually in your life to be supportive and to be helpful and to accept you for who you are. They were there because they were getting something out of the old you. And as you begin to find that strength and find who you really are, and they can't get their way, they move on and find somebody else that they can get what they want. But by actually stepping into your authentic self and your authentic being is when you start to attract in all those people who are actually in alignment with who you are and who you are becoming and support the change and have no issue with you having an outburst or a breakdown, and they're actually there to support you and help you through that process. And when you allow yourself that level of vulnerability, it also gives them permission to step into that level of vulnerability. And that's what creates real, true connection with people is through that vulnerability. And I did want to explain a little bit more. It's not just emotions in our body that show up physically in our body. Every single joint, every single part of our body actually plays a role in our personality and aspects of our consciousness. So yes, the organs generate and produce our emotions. And again, emotion, when you break it down to its root word, means energy in motion. So if we're not allowing ourselves to actually express those emotions, the energy becomes stagnant and stores itself into different areas of our body. And it usually picks an area of our body that's already weakened or injured. So let's say you have a bad shoulder and then you start to suppress all these emotions. Well, because the shoulder's already a weakened area, the body's just gonna go, okay, well, this can just go there. It can just go there. It can just go there. And then as these unexpressed and unprocessed emotions start to build up, it can then affect different aspects of how we interact with people in our life. And I will just use a simple example here of our shoulders. Our shoulders in our consciousness represent our responsibilities we carry in life. So if you're someone who's overwhelmed by the responsibility of life, chances are you're going to have issues with your shoulder, whether it's pain, achiness, maybe it's frozen shoulder or tendonitis or chronic inflammation. Who knows how it's going to manifest? And the other aspect there is sort of this area right at the base of our neck, top of our shoulders, represents the burdens we carry. And this is more about the burdens of life. And typically they are the burdens we've taken on from other people so they don't have to deal with it. And I know I touched on this on Monday, but this is actually a very common thing for women and especially mothers, because it's naturally part of the feminine energy to be nurturing and caring. And you're a mother, Robin, so you know this, right? You look out for everybody else first and then worry about yourself. So if we think of all those burdens you're carrying, it's like you're wearing a backpack. And those backpack straps come right across this area. And every time you're taking on other burdens from other people, you're taking those burdens, putting them in your backpack. And if you've been doing this for 30, 40 years and haven't actually released or let go of any of those burdens or given them back to the people they belong to, that bag gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And all of a sudden, you can't move your neck without moving your whole body. You get chronic headaches. You can't sleep at night. Maybe you get degeneration in the discs of the neck or herniations or who knows what else that can manifest from really just not expressing yourself the way that you're really meant to. You're still on mute there, Robin.
It's so funny that you say that because I have this huge lump in the back and it's like, oh, I'm developing a hunchback. And it just kind of gives a whole new appreciation and perspective as to why it might be there. I don't have any pain from it, but it does bother me. And I know I kind of looked at it like it's because of the way that I work and I'm looking down all the time and stuff like that, but it would make way more sense about that.
Yes, that stuff does play a role in our physical pain. But how many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh, I must have slept funny and I kinked my neck," right?
100%.
That to me, because I did massage therapy for so long, I dive deeper into the energetic side of health and healing. I began to realize that that's not the case. This is something that's been building over a long period of time. And it just took that one little movement or sleeping funny to actually set it all off. But that wasn't the cause of it. That was the result of the unprocessed, undealt with emotions or issues or struggles in that person's life that have finally manifested as a physical problem.
I have another example of that actually. When my husband used to work away, literally every single time he'd come home, he would get sick and end up basically in bed for the first 2 or 3 days of his trip home. And that was another one of the triggers for me that made me realize, like, all the stuff that he carried and that he dealt with or didn't deal with, I suppose, all the stress from being away from his family, working every single day, and then coming home to a place where it was like, finally, it was like his body finally letting it all out and saying, okay, relax for a few days. And yeah, so I totally agree with that. And
Yeah.
something else I want to kind of circle back to is the authentic self, and the fact that sometimes you lose some people that have been on your journey with you for so long. And I'm seeing in a lot of people, oftentimes that fear, it's losing them more so than listening to the grief or the shame or the guilt that they might have about themselves. It's more about not wanting to let somebody else go, and it's not really that that person is causing you to stay there or causing you any more extra shame or whatever, but it's just that they're just not in the same place as you are. And it's not that you have to let them go, and it doesn't have to be on bad terms. It's just more like, I have to serve myself now, and when you're ready, I'll be right there with you, but right now I can't. And so that's like another example of, okay, no, boundary up, see you on the flip side.
Well, if we really start to look at it in a different perspective, if you just look at you and your reality and your experience, you as Robin, you are your own universe. Your world revolves around you, where you are and what you're doing and what you're thinking and experiencing. My reality is my universe. So every person is really their own separate reality and own separate universe within a shared collective space that we call Earth. So we are just different universes interacting with each other all the time. And sometimes those universes get along and sometimes they don't. And when we start to understand that my universe, I'm the one in control. I'm the one who gets to make the decisions and choices, and I get to create how my universe and my reality is. And yes, that will involve having other people's and their universe come into my life. And at the same time, it means that other universes will vibrate out of my life because I'm not in that vibration anymore. And I can use my own personal experience to sort of show that. I guess it was about 7 years ago now, I went through a divorce. And when I was going through that separation and that divorce, I really took a step back, and I took that time to really look at everything that was going on in my life. So yes, I lost my house, I lost my cats and my business that I had with my ex-wife. I lost the security and the comfort of being in a relationship and all that. But I actually started to realize, like, this is an opportunity now for me to figure out what I really wanted in life for me. What did I want my life to look like? So I took another step back and said, okay, who am I hanging out with? Who are my friends? And are they supporting who I want to become and the direction I wanted to change my life towards? And at that time, these were my friends that I had since, childhood and high school. And at this point, I was 36. So that's like 20 to 25 years of friendship with these guys. But I realized that I couldn't be who I really was around them. Because anytime I talked about spirituality or energy, which was a passion of mine, they would laugh at me because they didn't get it and they didn't understand it. So I had to hide that part of me when I was with them. And we ended up, over the 25 years of friendship, we ended up having the exact same conversations, day in and day out, about the same stuff. So when I sort of took that step back and I realized, okay, I wanted to shift my business more into the energy work, and I wanted to dive deeper into my spirituality and what it means to be me and how I could be the best possible version of me to present to the world around me and start to honor my true self, well, that meant I had to walk away from those friendships. It's not like I called them up and said, like, screw you guys, I can't hang out with you anymore. It's just I shifted my focus, and our past just did this. You know, I still talk to them from time to time, but I don't have that deep connection that I used to. And in doing that, yes, it meant that, hey, I had 6 months of being pretty much on my own, pretty much alone, because I was trying to figure out what I wanted. And as I started to figure out, okay, this is the way I wanted my new universe to be constructed towards, and these are the goals I want to attain. Well, it was almost within a week that Sylvie then entered my life. And then when Sylvie entered my life, everything started to change. And then about 2 years later, when we moved here to New Brunswick, that's when we really started to attract in the larger circle of connections and friends that actually wanted to get to know who we really were. So we had to go through a process of letting go, and yeah, it was tough. But through that process, I learned more about who I was and why certain behaviors and certain aspects of who I used to be that weren't healthy helped me to begin to understand where they actually came from, where I learned those behaviors, and what I needed to do to begin to change them for the better.
I really resonate with that, actually. I was in the same boat. Once I, decided to go on my own and figure out what it was that I wanted to be, it is like, I'm still figuring it out day by day, but that release to receive is phenomenal. So like, that's, a few months after I started on that journey, Matt came into my life again after like 12 years of not seeing each other. And he seen something in me that I didn't. But he was very encouraging and very patient in letting me figure that stuff out on my own. And just like you said, like I grew in a different direction than a lot of friends, and still talk to some of them sometimes, but it's not that big of a connection. But I fell in love with so many new people that have helped me along this journey and helped me learn things about myself. Like even the summit, like this has been such a week and so much growth. I hope everybody else is feeling it as much as I am.
Well, and you'll notice that growth will continue probably for about the next 2 to 3 weeks. Things will continue to evolve and open up and shift for you, especially if you do continue any of those practices and examples that were given throughout the week here.
Yeah.
The life growth and things isn't about an instantaneous change. It's about what the long-term effect is. And when I do my sessions with people, I always tell them, like, a week to 2 weeks after our session, things are still going to be shifting. Things are still going to be releasing. New awarenesses and emotions are going to continue to surface as you sort of settle into your regular life in this new state of awareness and new state of being because of what we shifted through that session.
So for somebody who, this breath work and starting to listen to your body and things like that, it's kind of funny sometimes, like the times that these, aha moments come up, because I know before I started really getting into this, it would be random. Like I'd be doing the dishes and it would be like, oh, wow, this cool thought. This is weird. Why did I think this? Same with like having a shower or even just using the bathroom. So it's those times where you're like just spacing out, I guess, or
it's when you're not distracted by something.
Yeah, exactly. Where you're able to listen. So for those of you that are thinking like, holy cow, how do you get to this point? Just wait for it. It'll come, but just be open to receiving it, open to letting it come.
And be open to those messages coming to you in any possible form. It's not always a thought in your head. It's not always a voice in your head that gives you the answer. Maybe it's you're watching something on TV or reading something in the newspaper or the magazine or something on the internet, and something just clicks, and you read or you hear a verse in a song on the radio, and all of a sudden that's the answer you needed, and that gives you the awareness. So we need to be ready and willing to receive that message at any point through any means. Maybe it's just someone walking by on the street and they say something in a conversation they're having with the person they're walking with that you catch, and boof, that's enough to create that shift within you. It's not always because we're sitting quietly cross-legged in meditation that we get those answers. And to be honest, I don't meditate that way. I don't meditate well sitting still. I've had to learn how to make everything I do in my life a meditation. And I work much better with active meditation. And so I use my activities and my daily sort of life to practice meditation in every moment I possibly can.
I love that you said that, actually, because that's just it. Everybody has their own form of it. My father is like absolutely in love with his lawn, and it takes him hours and hours to do it. And that is his form of meditation. And once I brought that to his attention, I think it changed his perspective of it. So like maybe it's gardening, maybe it's reading a book, maybe like I love my form of meditation, especially in a busy lifestyle with my kids, is touch. So I might be rubbing my hands, or even rubbing their skin and things like that. It's just that's a way for me to give my mind an anchor to pay attention to and be in the right now. So everybody has their thing. You just got to be open, and maybe you already have one. You're just not using it to your advantage when it comes to being in the now and allowing yourself to process some thoughts, or not process any even.
Correct. Well, and it's, you even said it earlier, right? Washing the dishes, going grocery shopping, folding the laundry, any of that stuff, that we usually see as a chore, can actually become a moment of peace and clarity. If we just if we shift our perspective on the activity that we're going to, and just allow ourselves to be aware to the moment. That's really, to me, that's all meditation really is. It's just being present to what's happening in that moment, seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and feeling everything that is happening in that moment right now.
Yes.
That's meditation.
It's
awesome. Not about quieting the mind and drifting off and traveling to other places. Well, yes, meditation can be that. The ultimate goal of meditation is just be present.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just a simple breath. There, I meditate.
That's right.
Right.
Awesome. No, I appreciate this very much. I'm just going to stop the recording. I hope you all enjoyed that. Hope you took something out of it, and we'll see you again soon.